Okay, let's get to the final session of today. We have to invite Dr. Zong Wang. It's good silence now, yeah. Remain silent. So, 30 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm Zhong Wang. This is my first time to attend this BRICS meeting, and I'm very thankful for being invited here. And the Chinese Academy of Sciences has asked me to present an overview of the Chinese astronomy update of some major projects and so on, the status. So there have been some discussions in the previous talks, but I give a little more comprehensive overview. And then I discuss a little bit about these flagship programs and other programs that related to the BRIC framework. I myself run the South American Center for Astronomy for the Academy of Science of China. We have office in Santiago, Chile, so I came here relatively nearby, and that's why they asked me to give this talk. But I'm really impressed with all the other talks, with all the work you have been doing, and I will be happy to discuss any of the projects I'm mentioning here with you after the talk. Let's see. So in this talk, I first give some general information about the situation of astronomy in China. Then I'll discuss the facilities that's in operation and those under constructions. I briefly mentioned some large-scale research programs, but I'll discuss a little more about international collaborations, and especially the center I'm involved in. I'll give you a few more words because of my familiarity with it. So the Chinese astronomy community has grown a lot over the last 10, 20 years. As many of you know, many of you have visited China. Many of you are fairly familiar. But for those of you not familiar with the Chinese system, basically there's a system of Academy of Science, which runs all the national observatories, centered on the Chinese National Observatory. It has several satellite observatories, but two more national observatories which are relatively independent of the National Observatory, which is Purple Mountain and the Shanghai Observatory. The other ones are more of a satellite of the central one. In parallel, there's a university system. And a remarkable change over the last 10 years in China is that the university groups has started to grow and show their strengths. There are even a tendency of migration of scientists, even senior scientists, from the traditional observatory system to universities, because these universities has paid more attention to astronomical education as well as research. If you look at the map of China, traditionally the astronomical institutions are on the east coast. The observatories are on the west, on the southwest. But over the last few years, those on the west side of China and the southwest of China has also grown more of research capabilities. There are a lot of different facilities. I'll discuss some of them. But basically, most of them are either in the north or western part of China. If you look at the wavelength distribution, I would say that China is relatively abundant on radio side, relatively speaking. There are quite a few radio telescopes, including the the largest one, and several are under construction as well. These are under constructions, and these are the existing ones. The optical ones are relatively few and relatively weak. These are the satellites. I discussed these two satellites a little more. There are also, China is involved in international projects such as SK and TMT, as many of you know. And SWARM is also an international cooperation project. So for telescopes in operation, I mentioned a few large ones. LAMOS, as many of you already know, is a 4-meter multi-fiber optical telescope. It's mostly devoted to optical spectroscopic surveys. It was designed to go down to like 20th magnitude or more, but it's not for both technical and natural reasons of the scene of the site. It didn't reach as deep as it should have. Now it's about 17.8 magnitude, and so the spectroscopic survey are limited to a galactic object, but still it wins in the number of optical fibers. So it's still are significant in terms of science, especially the galactic science. It has now accumulated more than 10 million spectra. And if you add all the other spectroscopy surveys combined, it's something like 6 million. And almost 2 years ago was 9 million, now it's more than 10 million spectra collected. So at least for galactic study, it has been fairly important, successful. And the data has been published, released for the recent years. They're released 4, 5, 6, and it's all online. So I'm sure some of you have been in collaboration with Chinese scientists on spectroscopic surveys with LAMOS. So this is fairly important. The other large project recently accomplished is, of course, the FAST radio telescope. I'm sure some of you have already visited the site, and those of you who haven't, if you visit China, try to arrange a few more days to see it. It's quite impressive. It's 500 meters diameter, of course, and it has a feed horn that travels on top of it. So it can do drifting observations. It can also do tracking, pointing observations as well. And it's still in the commissioning phase. It's a test operation. And but they have already opened some time for a call for proposals, so-called shared risk proposal calls. So in principle, international partners can try to apply time, or if you have instruments to be used on this telescope, it can also be negotiated. So many of the people who are involved in SK are probably familiar with this as well. So in the recent call for proposal, there are more than 100 proposals and requesting like more than 2,000 hours of observing time. And if you look at the distribution of science, among the proposals at least, 1/3 of it has to do with pulsars. and then there are galaxies, interstellar medium, and other things. So it has a relatively wide reach in scientific subjects. In addition to the fast radio telescope, there's also 2 more large-size radio telescopes in operation, or being constructed. One is this one that accomplished 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago, 65-meter so-called Tianma telescope in Shanghai. It's part of the VRBI network that in China that involves telescope in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Xinjiang, and southwestern part of China is one there. I think this one is still under construction. This is a traditional but fully steerable radio telescope at multiple radio wavelengths, but it's participating in the VRBI network as well as deep space explorations. Now the 2 satellite project, space astronomy project. China has no space astronomy project until maybe 5 years ago. But this one was launched in 2015, so-called the Dark Matter Particle Explorer. It's a gamma ray detector in space, and its PI is Dr. Chang of Purple Mountain Observatory, and it's detecting gamma ray particles as a secondary effect of cosmic rays, and the key science is the detecting the spectrum of energy spectrum of electrons and finding detecting a break, a so-called TeV electron spectrum break of the cosmic rays. I'm not a high energy person, so I'm not familiar with this science, but I'm sure some of you are aware of this satellite project. The other satellite is sponsored by the High Energy Physics Institute of Academy of Science and also National Observatory. PI is Dr. Zhang. Is so-called inside hard X-ray monitor telescope, modular telescope. So basically, it's collimated X-ray imaging and spectral telescope. This is wavelength range and field of view and so on. So this one is also in operation for about 2 years now. And it has quite a few scientific results already, several papers published. And if you are interested in harder X-rays, such as X-ray burst, gamma ray burst, neutron star binary systems, black holes, and so on, you can maybe find more literature about this satellite and seek possible collaborations with this team. So now, large-scale research programs. Every year, the Academy and the National Foundation for Natural Science put out calls. But in recent years, they added major research programs, like large-scale programs. So there are programs to study large-scale cosmology or galaxy evolution or star formation, more comprehensive research programs rather than just focused programs. So I'll skip most of them because it's more theoretical or theme-based, not instrument-based. About the telescopes that still under construction, One is this so-called the 21 centimeter array. It's supposed to be a SKA finder, a pathfinder. This one was in Xinjiang to detect the signs of early cosmic dawn, as was discussed in one of the flagship programs discussed earlier. So this array was set up in Xinjiang, and with a lot of antennas and wind system. But there's also another one, as we also have discussed, also in northern part of China, of so-called Tianai Pathfinder experiment. That's headed by Dr. Shulei Chen. He was part of the collaboration with the Dr. Ma in South Africa. We heard earlier about this collaboration. That they have a different setup of 21 centimeter hydrogen line detection at high redshift. So these are two systems, and this one is currently more active. I think this group is more active. But they haven't finished, I think. In addition to this 21 centimeter cosmology project, there's also a solar radio array telescope project in the Mongolia, Inner Mongolia region. That is an array of radio telescopes to detect solar flares and surface effect of the sun in radio by arranging the telescope in a certain topographical pattern to better do the interferometry of the imaging of the surface of the sun. So this one is I think it's almost finished in test. Finished in 2013 and in test operation now. So this is a solar project. Now moving on to a project that's pending for approval and funding, not including the Sitian project that Roberto had just discussed. There are also a project called K-dust, which is a 2.5 meter optical telescope in Antarctica, and a 5 meter terahertz radio telescope. Both of them in Antarctica, in the so-called Kunnan Station, near it's at the plateau on the Antarctic continent, fairly close to the pole. Then there's a large optical telescope of 12 meter size, this one called ROT. And this one is supposed to start already because it's part of the 5-year plan, 2016, 2020. Started in this time frame. And the preliminary design and the testing of concept has been done and design is done. But we are still deciding exactly where to put it. The reason to make it a 12-meter telescope is in part because it's a segmented optical telescope. And China is helping to build the segmented telescope, TMT, the 30-meter one, with the US. And it turns out that if we use similar optical design and similar segmented mirror, because the mirror is made in China, if we just make some more and make a smaller scale telescope, it comes out to 12 meter. So it's a natural outcome of that collaboration. So this one, I'm part of the office in Chile, so we are also discussing the possibility of whether we could locate this telescope in Chile as well, because of the site, quality of the site. We're still debating that. In the radio, as I mentioned, there's a very large 100-meter steerable radio telescope being built for Xinjiang province in the west, on the western part of China. This one it's also part of the VRBI-led work, similar to one in Shanghai, but even bigger. It's called QTT, named for the site. And also in preparation for space projects, there is a optical module for survey for the space station that's been funded and in preparation. Basically, on the Chinese space station, they call for potential science projects, and this is one that NIOC has proposed to do optical surveys on the space station. So it's a 2-meter telescope, could be serviced by the space station. It's one of the modules. And it's almost all sky and a very large field of view, and supposed to be detecting a lot of variability sources. So that's in collaboration, hopefully, in the future with projects such as transit telescope network and so on. So this one is under development, and it costs quite a bit because of its space project, and it's the first optical astronomy project in space for China. As mentioned before, there's so-called Einstein probe mission. That's a space X-ray telescope. Supposed to have both a survey mode to monitor the X-ray sky for variability sources, as well as a follow-up X-ray telescope that can follow-up work, do follow-up work that's there. So has large field of view, and survey telescope has a fairly good sensitivity. These are the scientific objectives. I don't need to repeat all of this, but as Roberto mentioned, that the feature of this survey telescope is very wide field and so-called lobster eye technology. Okay. I think yesterday people also mentioned this SWAM telescope. That's an international project that China has participated in. It's mostly a UV time domain, variable object, multi-band variable object monitor, so SWAM. This means China-French collaboration, but there's also British-German participation as well. In connection with this project, the GWAC, the ground-based small telescope array or cluster of small telescopes, in connection with the project to monitor variable sources are also under development. I think there was some discussion about GWAC, so some people are already aware of that. This is a summary of the SWAM mission, and it's a China-French mission. It's basically Chinese Space Agency and European Space Agency jointly want to develop some science project, and this is one that they selected from many proposals. This is one in astronomy, one of the few in astronomy. Okay, yeah, I'll skip this. This is a large example of large research program based on NAMO's telescope. That was funded by the academy. Okay, let me mention some international collaborations. International collaborations, for example, on the TMT, on the 30-meter optical telescope. I mentioned China has participated in both science and engineering many Chinese companies have volunteered to join this to develop their technology for these large projects. Similarly, the SKA participation on the Chinese part, as many of you know, very familiar with, is led by the Ministry of Science and Technology, which is parallel government agency as Academy of Science. But Ministry of Science and Technology has a little more attention on this technology part. And that's part of the reason they are very supportive about the SKA participation. And there's Australia component, South Africa component, and so on. So you are all familiar with. Also, as part of the National Observatory as well, Academy of Science set up this office in Chile. That's the office I'm part of. We call CASACA, which is preparatory office for Chinese future telescopes in the Southern Hemisphere, in particular in Chile. So that's the job that I am doing. In addition to that, there are also collaborations with several Eastern Asia countries, such as South Korea, Japan, and so on. So there's so-called East Asian Observatory. We try to model after ESO, but not on that scale yet. There are active collaboration between China and South Africa and China and Australia and so on. So these are the scope of international collaborations. The 30-meter telescope, I don't need to mention too much. China-South Africa collaboration has been very active. There are a lot of activities, exchanges, and so on. This is 4 institutions of East Asian collaboration. For CASACA, for South American Center for Astronomy, we now have about 20 people in total, long-term visitors working in Santiago. And we support joint programs. We support fellowships, like postdoc fellowships. Some people have discussed the possibility of fellowships under the BRICS umbrella. We are already doing this in Chile. But the fellowship, for example, the postdoc fellowship we have opens to all applicants around the world. It's not limited to Chile or it's not limited to Chinese applicants. We only require that applicants has some project related to Chinese collaboration with Chilean scientists. We also support projects such as assessing. Assessing has a component in Chile, and we joined to support that part. So, but a major function of our office is to study the feasibility for China to build future large telescope in Chile, because we know that that's a good place for international large facilities. And these are our postdoc program and candidates, postdoc fellows. So you can see it's international. Now we have more than 16. Some of them are already finished fellowship. So the projects that we are working on in Chile include a time domain telescope, a set of time domain telescopes that we try to bring to Chile. We try to bring the SAO telescope, CSO telescope to Chile, renamed as LCT telescope. This one was on Mauna Kea, and we tried to bring it to Chile, put it on a higher side near ALMA, such that at sub-millimeter it can function better. There's a project to test on a 1 meter ESO Schmidt telescope to do all sky surveys. This one to similar to the CTN, but a prototype. Okay, and also a 2 meter telescope that in collaboration with Japan and Taiwan to do follow-up observations of this survey. So there are small telescope projects we try to bring to Chile, and the potential large telescope. We also run an astronomy data center in Chile in collaboration with ALMA. So this one can digest all of ALMA data. We can discuss it tomorrow as well, see what's commonality between BRICS project. And the telescope site, the observatory site we developed is in this area. It's called Winteronus, as Roberto has mentioned, and so also another site nearby. And this is VRT site, and this is ELT site. And this is the future concept of future observatory design. So I'm running out of time. We also try to develop a campus in Santiago. That's the design of the headquarters for National Observatory in Santiago. So in summary, China has ground-based telescopes, space-based instruments, some international collaborations, Antarctica base, and our office in Chile and future telescope in Chile. And also we're still working on a radio telescope in Argentina as well. So that's the overall scale of the astronomy situation. Finally, for these three flagship programs, many talks have discussed already. NIOC want me to convey their strong support for this large telescope. In addition, in August this year, National Science Foundation of China has issued a call for the BRICS scientific programs, all in all fields, in the BRICS collaboration framework. And they say that 146 proposals has been collected, and 10 of them for astronomy. So which 10? These are after those flagship programs were selected. So these are 10 new programs. So I have the list. I don't have time to discuss them in detail, but you can look at it. These are the ones proposed for the framework of BRICS collaboration. So it has Chinese PIs and has collaborators in BRICS countries. Some of you are sitting here. But anyway, these are the proposed for the first round for the BRICS collaboration, future BRICS collaboration programs in astronomy. And we don't know, it's not finished the selection yet, so we don't know which one will be selected. And also, we are also discussing new possibilities, such as a possible collaboration with Yama telescope, for example, and other under the umbrella of the BRIC collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, since we ran out of time, there's time for just one single question.
Yeah, that's a very nice talk. It's an overview of all important projects in China for astronomy. You have shown a couple of projects that are pending on the lack of budget, okay? And one of them is the deste that we are very interested because you are working on supernova survey. And I would like to know which kind of problems China has in terms of, there is only one agency for all projects, I mean the National Science Foundation of China, or that's money from...
Yeah, that's a problem for China, that has multiple agencies, all at the ministry level, that could be potential funding sources. So in terms of of possibilities, this National Science Foundation of China, the Ministry of Science and Technology, the Academy of Sciences, they're all parallel. And also now the universities have the Ministry of Education also getting to the fray. But in the case of KEDAS specifically, there's additional agency that manages affairs of polar exploration. And the polar exploration for China is a separate thing. It's a national priority or something. So in that sense, they took over the management of the whole project, including KEDAS, and that created problems. So it's not, in that case, that optical telescope is not a matter of money or funding. Funding was allocated, but the different agencies have some infights in terms of who manages what, and so on. So we have people from Purple Mountain here, so you can talk with him some more.
Okay, I think so. This is the last talk of the afternoon, and then we have we started the BRICS proposal discussions. I'll probably send the microphone back to Ulysses.
Okay. So we proposed a small discussion session in the program, and this is to kind of organize and review the ideas that came out, and maybe, as talking to Takalani over coffee break, to already advance and prepare some of the things that we are going to discuss tomorrow. And so, let's see. And starting with the most important topic. So, this is a, how can I say? It's a logistical question, but also a digestive question. So the program says that at 6 o'clock, each one of us will start to eat a full stick of meat. I think that maybe we are not hungry enough at 6 o'clock to start doing this. What about start doing this at 7:30? What do you prefer? Yes? So you can eat maybe more than one stick. Yes? Okay. So we are going to something like 7 o'clock. I guess the bus will leave from the hotel and take everybody there with a bit of a bigger hunger too. Okay? And you are going to have about that.
Just an information for the others. O jantar hoje vai ser na churrascaria Fogo de Chão. Infelizmente nós não temos condições de convidar a todos, mas vocês são bem-vindos se quiserem nos juntar a nós, desde que paguem as suas próprias contas. Para os delegados do BRICS, o governo está pagando, mas para os outros participantes do Congresso, cada um por si. Ok? São bem-vindos, 7h30, churrascaria Fogo de Chão, aqui no começo do aterro, aqui bem pertinho daqui mesmo.
Okay, so Bruno was just criticizing all of you for different things during these days. No, sorry. What he was saying is that the dinner is free, is covered for the delegates, so people that are coming from the other countries, but the other participants are not. So he was just explaining that.
Very welcome.
Very welcome, but we cannot cover for.
We go from here to the hotel and the hotel to the restaurant.
Yes. And we 7 o'clock, 7 something, the bus leaves and it will be arranged. Okay, so that was the first thing. Second thing, so as we said in the beginning of the conference, there is the possibility to publish the papers that were presented here and also the documents or some more scientific public version of the projects that have been proposed for the BRICS collaboration in the journal of the Brazilian Academy of Science. That's a normal journal, indexed with peer review and everything. It's online and open access. It has a lot of credibility. It's the journal of the National Academy of Sciences. And they have been very kind. They put no restrictions on dates and deadlines. We can arrange that by ourselves. And there is no special requests on length from the journal or from ourselves. So the idea is, if we think after watching these 2 days of presentations, that it could be interesting to have the results of these discussions or what has been presented, published in an online journal, scientific journal, so that it can stay as a reference, as a document for the BRICS. And so we can arrange that this be done. It would be very nice. And if we have a critical number of people that submit, I don't know what critical number means, but let's say a fair percentage of the amount of presentations that we had, we can even have a special issue. So I think this can be used to showcase the flagship projects, can be used to showcase the projects that were presented, the reviews of facilities of the countries and things like this. I leave this open, of course. We're going to have to discuss this more in detail in a follow-up via email, but maybe it's good to have a show of hands of who thinks that he or she would be willing to publish and would be happy to put the thing.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Do we have to write it in Portuguese?
No, in English. In English, yes. Then we Google Translate and publish. Okay. Okay, so can I just have a show of hands of the people that would be happy to do that? Because no hands go up.
Can you explain that to be in the same PowerPoint format, or is it to be like proper text?
No, it's a text. It's a journal, academic journal. So there is going to be a LaTeX template that you're going to get, like a submission to a journal. There is going to be a, let's say, formal peer review process because the journal is peer reviewed, but we are going to arrange to have referees just to not to bother anybody, you know, with these things. I think it's fair enough. And can I have that again? Okay, so it seems that many people are happy with that. So probably what we're going to do. Okay, maybe you can say. I mean, what time scale you think it's feasible for you guys to have that? I mean, end of the year, later than that, so before the end of the year. So we could set the submission deadline by the end of the year so that the review process and publishing happens early next year, or you want everything to happen before? For us, it's the same. Deadline for submission January, so that you can write over Christmas and things like that. Okay. Okay. January the 1st. What? But January the 1st? 15. Okay, so I'm going to talk to the editors of the journal and propose January the 15th as a deadline. Then we circulate, and so that they can also plan for the special issue sometime in the middle of. Well, there is no restriction and no.
I suggest a minimum of 5 and a maximum of 10.
Yes, I mean, if that sounds reasonable, I think that, I mean, this would have to accommodate, for example, the flagships and the discussions of the different projects. I think between 5 and 10 can accommodate all that.
Unless we want to have this as a vehicle to actually publish the flagship proposals in their entirety.
It could also be, yes. Okay, I think there would be no problem. I can check something like 20 pages. I can check that. I think that there may be no issue. So we could have a 20-page paper to start the issue, and then the series of contributions, something like this. It would be a good showcase, perhaps. Yes? Okay, so I'm going to discuss all these points with the editorial board, and then I get back to you by email. Good. Okay. And so we prepared a few discussion points, but basically I was kind of thinking through the things and put it down. It could be complete rubbish, but I think it kind of touches on the points that were discussed here. So now I just want to go through them, quickly explain, and then we are open for discussions, comments. You can trash what's written there, and completely free. So we have been discussing about a BRICS network for multi-wavelength and multi-messenger science. That was the topic of this meeting. Now, the first question is, I mean, is this the discussions that we are putting here to focus and to feed directly into the flagship projects, or also beyond that and aside to that? For example, what could be this relation? Of course, we support the flagship projects, But is the things that we are going to advance from here restricted to the timeline of the flagships that can be somehow longer because it involves approval of resources and discussions? Or is there something regarding this network for multi-wavelength and multi-messenger science that we can start to do now as BRICS? Of course, the different groups are doing things already, but do you want to comment already on that?
Yeah, I do. I think I would like to restructure the question and say, is there something we use in the flagship going now?
Okay, yes, yes. So, okay, so kind of pathfinder to the flagships before they are approved. Yes, okay, okay. So that's a better question. Perfect. I'm thinking, for example, on the intelligent observatory, on what the PMO showed, on what ISON showed. CITIAN is still to start, so I didn't write here. But there is the 21 centimeter initiatives in the different countries. So, as you said, so can we enable this, all this, or a combination of this, or whatever, as precursors to a phase one network, also involving the IT infrastructure that's being proposed in the flagships and things like this, so that we can show work also to facilitate getting the projects approved. So if we show some results, probably it's easier. With little resources, we can say, look, if we did this with little resources, imagine what we can do with the money we asked. Then there is another question that I would like to ask you. So about the Open Universe Initiative, do you think and how do you think our projects could benefit from it? So see what I write. How can we benefit from it? Yes, so this is an opportunity that's coming up, and I think the BRICS collaboration can use it for its benefit. So how can we do that? For example, is a dedicated BRICS database within Open Universe for whatever science cases something that's of interest? So if we start a transient project, maybe we can use the initiative to give visibility. If we start the BRICS project, we can give visibility through that. We can make, I don't know, different science case channels within the initiative to do that. That's independently of countries' approvals and things like this, I think. And this could be also an opportunity to then use back what the UN can give us to strengthen data science activities and also to push a bit more VO in the BRICS, which is a bit slow, I think, in terms of activities. At least in Brazil, it's not very active. Then space debris, we have discussed it. I put science case here in inverted commas because it was pointed out that it's not strictly science because this is man-made objects. But could it be interesting to kind of call attention of the importance of the things that we do in terms of impact for the government, a thing like this? Could be a side thing that raises the profile and the leverage of the group. And then there's another thing that I thought that maybe, this was just completely from my head. In our group, BRICS Astronomy Group, there is some information. But for example, there is no listing of facilities, directory of open data access activities, calls for proposals from the different facilities in the BRICS. Maybe just putting this information up in an easy way could be a good way to start boosting collaboration and facilitating people from different countries to ask for timing telescopes and things like this. So maybe this could be some very easy thing to make kind of a BRICS astronomy directory to focalize and direct the resources that we have available, and so that people, independently from being sitting on this room, from having been involved in these groups, can start and collaborate among themselves. I mean, if we have more even bilateral cooperation between the countries, of course, the appeal of our group increases. So maybe this is a very easy way to kind of boost that. And then we can, in the newsletters of the national societies, show these and make links to that to see the opportunities open for using the South African telescopes or Chinese telescopes, whatever. So these are the points that I listed. I don't know if there is some big thing that's out of it, but I think that's the opportunity for everybody to speak so that we can also then already start converging for the discussions tomorrow and make things more efficient and more productive tomorrow. So.
What about the subject for the next week? It's also a subject to speak here.
I have no idea.
How
we decide the subject for this meeting not much before this meeting, so I don't know how it works.
I will start from the very end. I'm Jorge Horvath from Sao Paulo University. This is my first time in contact with you, and I found that the potential, the initiative is much, 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 much higher than the money is receiving, the attention is receiving. Therefore, my first proposal is not to talk anymore with politicians about science. This is not of interest to them. What I suggest is that tomorrow you will discuss at the level of the organization the confection of a portfolio of, say, 20, 25 pages at least, making the case for the governments to buy the initiative of the BRICS, possibly with the participation of a journalist or a diplomatic people in public relations and so on, that can talk directly to, yes, not to talk, I mean, it's not to suggest that you forget about the real world of collaborations, but this is not what is going to bring money to and support, real support from the governments. Therefore, a portfolio of that given in all the languages we know of, which is also important because the politicians even, don't even speak English or something like that, at least ours in Brazil, could really supply the kind of money to make the offer of future calls much, much more higher than it is, because it's really a shame that the level of support of the government is so low at this point. So I believe that the importance of such a collaboration has not been stressed enough at the political level. I'm talking about ministries, I'm talking about parliaments and so on, not talking about the rest of the things that are extremely important from the hardcore, and we tend to concentrate on them because we're really scientists that like to discover new phenomena and so on. But this is not what will boost the initiative at the political level. Therefore, my suggestion is to create a small group, to create that portfolio, and to make contact with people in public relations, journalism, so on, to produce something which the ESO or National Science Foundation and many other things do that well, to be able to put like a gun in the hands of people that will negotiate for the support. Therefore, you can make this initiative if you believe that it's going to be positive in the form you want. Thank you.
Yeah, George's proposal, I think, is that we must cross the line just between us and the ministries, us and ministries, minister and us, that we should show to the population as well, through the newspapers, to the media, through the web page of our institutes, what we managed to do here. We show through the scientific society, we prepare this showcase and we show to everybody, not just for the ministries.
Yeah, thank you. I think whilst we're still on this point, and I think the last point there, I think during my opening speech on Sunday, if you remember, I mentioned an idea of a BRICS Astronomical Society or something like that, that can promote the BRICS in terms of, maybe the science and the kind of things that are happening. Because at the moment, obviously, we do have us as the secretariat. But the challenge, of course, with that is that we only mainly just focus on the administrative support to the BRICS, but not really going into the level of And if you look at the usage of even the BRICS Astronomy website is very low. And you know, but if you were, because you're talking about the BRICS Astronomy directory and listing of facilities and opportunities, I mean, that really requires a much more active work in terms of harnessing that and communicating. But of course, that could be, you know, something in the maybe medium, I don't know, short to medium, that, you know, you could, even if you just say you work towards something like, you know, like that, you know, that could sustain the work of the BRICS, even like you were saying, beyond the government. Then, because you then become a community of scientists and astronomers that have got interest in making sure that the work is going. You know, so yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think I'd like to sort of revisit this idea of a portfolio. I think actually what we need is a prospectus. We've now met for 5 years and had an opportunity for colleagues from all of the BRICS countries to come and talk about what we're doing, what's important. And what's come out of that is this concept of flagship proposals, which tries to synthesize the ideas and visions of 19 proposals that were on the table at the beginning. So I think that this working group has done a lot of work, and at this point in time, we're ready to move into a phase where we want to do something more substantive. And I think what we ought to think about doing is composing a prospectus which captures what's happened, what we've done in this 5 years, and why that has led us to this flagship proposals, what we see to be the benefit, why this direction leverages cooperation to let us do something we can't do individually, that together as a BRICS collaboration, and to really motivate moving into the next phase of this working group's life. So I think the idea of putting together some prospectus which basically tells the story of what we've accomplished in 5 years and where we want to go now and motivates the flagship projects is what we ought to be thinking about.
When it comes to the, let's say, publicity campaign, I wonder if it would not be sensible not to do it just for our working group. There are other BRICS working groups which probably have the same problems in that context. So this campaign might be a common campaign of all these working groups.
In the meeting of Campinas that was held 2 weeks ago with the ministers of the 5 countries for all the science groups, how we call the STI, what does it mean? Science Technology Innovation Group of the BRICS. They make some recommendations, and one of the recommendations is that to have this STI subcommittee that will look after all the science groups. And this is something that we can bring to STI, because they are high-level employees of the ministry. Say, look, we need to make this campaign, this publicity for all science groups, and here our portfolio to start that.
Yeah, just to build on that last point and the first point about the BRICS network, and on Russ's point, I think what we need this perspective, but also moving forward with 3 flagship projects. We need coordination. I was talking to someone at Tea and Coffee yesterday that I think we should take a holistic approach with the flagship projects because they are interrelated. Like Russ's big data will form the baseline for the other 2, and there was other opportunities that came about. And this network and also arising from there is this BRICS Astronomy Society, which, although South Africa is providing a secretariat on a part-time basis, maybe we should look at setting up the society and having a permanent secretariat who then can progress these things and also assist in driving those 3 flagship projects forward, and at the same time leading the development of this perspective.
We had a list last year, and as I understand, my first time was last year. As I understand, all of them are based upon ongoing collaborations. There's nothing that's starting from scratch that we are beginning or began last year or are beginning now. From working last year, from working during this year, my impression is that it's mainly based upon how you get funding from every country. And I'm not sure if the funding discussion will be something that can block the progress of this thing, because the contribution in money is different from different countries. So that may be a case that we should keep as we are going, keep the flagship project with the fund that we have now, keep advertising them as a flagship project while we apply for additional funding. Because if that's my impression, that we decide to go for a flagship after we receive funding that we are applying for at this point, and we did that for the 21 centimeter project. We are not sure we receive funding from the Brazilian side at least, but we keep going. And my view on this, that's what we are going to do in the 21 centimeter, is to keep going while we pledge for additional funding.
Okay, I have just a short comment. Actually, we wait funding not from individual countries. We wait funding from the BRICS. And to get this funding, we should put just one flagship proposal. In another case, it will be, I know, at least in Russia, it does not work. You should bring one proposal and say, okay, with some explanation, with this showcase, with everything. But this proposal was adopted by all astronomers of the BRICS. And we are ready to work, and we have some development, and something like this. And only in this case, we have a chance to get funding. If we will not get funding, we can speak about all this initiative about society, astronomical society, and everything, but it will be zero output.
I was not going to talk about the flagships, but I agree with Dimitri. Flagship is one ship. It would be difficult to convince any funding agency to fund 3 similar initiatives at the same time. But I was going to talk about funding a bit. I had an idea which I commented to some of you during these days, but I think I should say it here again. One of the big problems with funding which we have is that there are the national funding institutions which have different priorities, different rules, but there's no central funding institution for the BRICS. On the other hand, 5 years ago, the BRICS founded the BRICS Bank, which should be responsible for furthering initiatives within our countries. So I know that a bank is not a funding agency, but maybe there are ways to convince that body through some political channels, which I'm not acquainted with, to help us in this context. We should keep that in mind, I think.
Yes, in this case, I think this BRICS banks, it has more or less the ethos of a development bank. So if we frame at least part of the things in development terms, then maybe there is already a prescription to use these funds for that.
There's a question that arises out of that, of course, is what gets funded. And I think we talk about the idea of forming a BRICS Astronomy Society, and I agree with the comment that doing such would be doing something in a vacuum unless there's funding to actually do things. I think what we probably need to do is think about if we imagine funding flagship projects through some common fund, then we need an agency that can receive a common fund. And what we probably need to do is form some sort of BRICS Astronomy Secretariat that has the capacity and the mandate to receive funds and to disperse funds to flagship projects. And so we need to think a little bit about the business structure, how we actually would coordinate and governance ourselves if we're going to be receiving funding.
Well, maybe, I don't know, but the bank itself might have some structure for funding development projects. I say that because in Brazil we have the National Development Bank, and sometimes it funds directly projects. This usually agriculture, water, poverty, but the money goes from there and is administered by something, but goes directly from there. Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, but that's why the idea of a society into that structure where you can put in funding. Because you, let's say, register it as an entity or whatever. That allows you to tap into funding beyond these governments. Let's say if another source of funding was interested, whether it be the UN or some millionaire philanthropists out there, then you have a vehicle be able to say we can get the funding. Because the secretariat is just also a government at this stage. You can't receive funds necessarily to do the work of this administrator.
Takalani, it was.
No, I do agree that in the absence of funding, of course, it gets very difficult to do that. But what we can do, you can, if we go in the route of a single integrated proposal, you can in the that as an item or whatever, but you receive the funding. One of the things we work towards some kind of society structure.
Okay, society never funded by the government. National societies never funded by government. You should keep this in mind.
It has to be something like a joint institute or something.
Yes, it's another story.
A foundation.
It's another story. It's not a society. Society is just a membership of. I'm a member of International Astronomical Union, European Astronomical Union. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it could be any other name you can use. I mean, if you look at the IAU, for instance, you have member countries contributing, and then you also have individual astronomers contributing, but you also have governments.
But do you know the size of this contribution? Do you know the size of these contributions?
No.
Okay, it's a small amount of money.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
Okay, I have a comment.
You need a legal entity, a foundation, something. Yeah, maybe a foundation, of some sort. Yeah.
Okay, I have a comment about funding again, because I totally agree with us that we should try, and the original idea was when we created this bank to collect some money and to support some projects which are useful for all 5 countries. It was the original idea, and the problem, but nobody asked money from BRICS, and probably will be first who ask something from the BRICS, not from the government. And it should be BRICS because, you know, in each country we have our own decadal survey and all this stuff. And in Russia, for example, this network, optical network, we discussed this during decadal survey, and as I remember, it's 4th in the rank. So it's not on the first position. So you cannot get money, by normal way.
Yeah, I think discussing budget is important if you really want to do something, and also I think we should think beyond a union or society or a secretariat, because if you talk about real projects, you have to have the budget stability, and a secretariat or a union. I don't think you can assure budgetary stability. So somehow, if the BRICS countries determine to do something on science independently, they have to commit a certain level of funding of budget on a long-term basis, on a sustainable basis. Just look at the European Southern Observatory. ESO is the only, or almost the only, really successful international astronomical establishment that really accomplished long-term goals. So I don't think any of the BRIC countries is member of ESO yet. But if you want to model after that, I think the East Asian countries thought about that, but they couldn't do it because of political reasons. I don't know if BRIC countries can overcome the political reasons. But if you really want to do something, my view is you just do something like ESO or call it an observatory or something. Yeah, a center or institute or just call it observatory, international observatory or something. But the key is you have to have a stable budget.
There's probably a smaller scale experience that I've seen China doing with other countries with the joint centers. I know Brazil has a number of joint centers that work quite well, and the funding is transferred between the two institutions. I mean, INPE gets money straight from, I guess it's CAST. I don't remember exactly which kind of, what is the institution, but that works fine, and it's a line of funding that's independent from INPE, where I work. And maybe a joint center between the institutions, or maybe the national astronomical societies of each country would be a way to think on how to proceed. In a smaller scale, that works fine. I don't know, there would be a larger scale, we will have to think. But I've seen it working well.
Okay, I can see that we don't have the right model, but we see from the comments that having something together, institute or a foundation, something that can be a glue for the BRICS astronomy with a social security number or whatever that you can receive money and then can take decisions is something that we should think about. I think that I don't know if we will leave this meeting today or tomorrow with this model ready, but from all the talks, the one thing that we see is that we have to work together in one direction and having something together that we show and we can receive money back for that structure, that we should think about how we create that. Either a joint institute or a foundation or something like that, that is not just the secretariat. I think this is an idea that's circulating around.
I absolutely agree with this. And actually it's a good subject for the next meeting. Because now we have some strategy, tomorrow we will define the flagship, and we'll go with this flagship project further to government. And next meeting we can devote to this idea, because we'll have 1 year to discuss this and to think about this, and secretary will inquire in ministry how can we proceed with this.
Which means that China is really a great place to do the meeting because the BRICS Bank is in China.
After the meeting, instead of going to the steakhouse, we go to the bank door and we take money.
I don't know if I understood it well, but I think we needed to have first, for us, funding agenda, you know? We want money for... Yeah. Right. But that's for us. That's for us. Not, I mean, you need to discuss a funding agenda for the BRICS Astronomy. Because I see several different ways to get money and also to spend money. Okay, so, but we need to have this funding agenda first. Excuse that.
While he brings the microphone, Takalani, maybe you want to say afterwards that thing that you told me about tapping on time fraction of instruments using a virtual infrastructure like the VLBI does as a possible idea of make some things run that we talked on the coffee break. You remember? You can say that. Well, if you don't remember, I can tell on your behalf. Because I do remember. No, but go you first.
Okay. So I think the idea of having some BRICS Astronomy Foundation is important. And I think clearly it will take some time to develop. But I don't think that should preclude moving forward with hopefully some decisions that are made tomorrow on the nature of the flagships and how we might move, because we did anticipate starting these projects with no funding or very little funding, and therefore I think it's important to maintain momentum to allow these projects to begin at least the early steps of these. So I would just, yeah, that's my own belief.
I think I perfectly agree, and I think that's fundamental. I mean, if we stop doing things waiting for money, the chance of getting money is less. We have to show work. But what Takalani had told me is that while we were discussing that, you mentioned the VLBI model in which you use 20% time of different antennas, and therefore you can do a large encompassing project with impact, just with agreements on time usage of different facilities that are there already. Maybe one way to start things for us is something like this.
Well, that actually started with China and South Africa in these last lot of bilaterals. Okay. So there was an agreement made about the sharing of facilities and access of astronomers from the two respective countries. And an MOU has been drafted between the director of the South African Astronomical Observatory and the equivalent at the NAOC. So I don't think that's finally signed and put to bed yet, but it's progressed and it's nearly there. So this is clearly something which could be expanded BRICS-wise if we felt that that was a way to go.
And of course we could do that already thinking on the direction that the flagships point. So that could be a parallel line to add to.
Actually, yes. When you think about it, that is almost like the first phase, at least for the transient work. It's accessing all of those facilities, but it's doing it a little bit more formally than how it's been done before, which has been on a PI basis rather than as a group deciding to do things collectively.
Yeah, and not only on the direction of flagship, but one is initiative of like that of sharing infrastructures by MOUs that justify the joint center for BRICS Astronomy.
Yeah, look,
because what this joint center for BRICS Astronomy does, what is that? That is the institute that provides infrastructure shared between the BRICS. I think this is a backup for a joint institute that justify the creation of something like that, give support to the flagships, and create the possibility of receive funding. Mm-hmm. So I think
And I think some of these initiatives that have been discussed about student exchanges and things like that, they could start
all these things can be
now.
on the context of
Yeah, so I think I agree with that, because I think all of these things point you to the same direction. You know, whether you're talking about a joint institute or a foundation or a society, always saying that you need a central coordinating structure for access to each other's facilities, exchange of research and all of those, and many of the things that and I agree that, you know, we don't put anything on hold and say we're waiting for funding. We carry on with the momentum whilst we are exploring all of these ideas, whilst we are pursuing the funding and submitting these proposals to the BRICS, you know, STI mini of the BRICS STI ministerial, because that's where we're going to take this proposal that, you know, as a working group, this is what we want to do, and this is what we need the funding for. I mean, I was just thinking that if tomorrow I was, let's say, to come up with funding, let's say from South Africa, to put into the BRICS, where will be my first immediate? So now I was thinking, okay, we have bilateral astronomy partnerships, let's say with India, with China. I'm talking specific astronomy where you don't compete with other sectors. Netherlands and UK, and I think a small funding for the US or something. I mean, this is over and above the BRICS calls, or this is over and above the bilateral calls that we have. So in the case of China, South Africa has a bilateral relationship with China where there is a call in which astronomy can also compete. But we also have an astronomy specific bilateral that is added to that. You know, so you could think of, you know, maybe that those specific astronomy bilaterals, you could almost, you know, withdraw them and then put them here centrally, because in any case, you know, you want to develop the BRICS partnership, you know, instead of having all these too many bilaterals amongst ourselves. But then you have an umbrella for the BRICS. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
yes.
So are you saying that maybe we see an end of bilaterals between countries within BRICS and everything is done through a BRICS multilateral program?
Yeah, for the astronomy. Yeah. Yeah, if I were to get money, that's what I'll probably do, and say, okay, I'm withdrawing this, I'm putting it in for the BRICS cooperation to strengthen this because a lot of those bilaterals, if I understood very well, is what is feeding into these flagships. Whatever you were doing with China, what we're doing with India, you know, is things that already you're beginning to say is what gave you the basis and the momentum. Yeah, somehow, not entirely. Yeah. Okay.
Well, so it seems that tomorrow we may be discussing two documents. One document would be the flagships, the science, and then we would probably be discussing more kind of joint institute or joint model to take to the ministerial level. Yeah, so maybe that's going to feed into the agenda tomorrow, I guess. And do you have a comment?
Yeah, just following what Dimitri said, we have at least three. We had a rank of proposal last year, and I agree with Dimitri that there's no way that we have many of them funded, but we should not drop any of them. So the best way is give a ranking of proposals. Then you send what we agree that's the number one, number two. It's hard to decide. We tried to do this last year. We didn't reach an agreement on that, but. It's real hard to remove. Ranking would be probably the less traumatic way to do it.
Yes, I mean the 21 centimeter is clearly number 3, so there is no problem with it. Okay, so maybe
But,
they don't have
the
enough
other-
caipirinha to continue.
Yeah,
yes?
I think that the discussion of flagships, and if you rank them, if you kill somebody tonight, or if you try to join the three in a big one, we can talk tomorrow, talk later with some caipirinhas, and you decide tomorrow. And I think that we should at least take on the resolutions of this meeting, something on directions of this joint initiative of the agreements. We will not close this today, but I'm very happy of what happened here today. Not just by the great talks we have, and I have been in several meetings that we have nice talks, and when the talks finish, we take questions. A big silence happens, and then somebody just asks something just to break the silence. I was very happy that every talk we have to stop because people have more things to ask for. That was very interesting. And if we proceed what we are doing today, and in a few years we get this agreement ongoing, it's a very big step, gentlemen. What we are doing today is very important. I will call clapping of hands. I will call, como é que chama? Bater palmas?
Yeah, I call between ourselves. Okay, we go to the